Welcome to Episco-pols, bringing you the latest in faith-based advocacy from the Episcopal Church Office of Government Relations. This is Alan with the Episcopal Church Office of Government Relations, and it's wonderful to be back with you all for Season 3 of our Episco-pols podcast. We're grateful for the reach, the new audience that this platform has provided us, and this season we look forward to exploring election engagement in this year's U.S. election. So for our first episode, I'm joined by Linder Blachly, the Director of the Office of Government Relations, to help us set the stage, not just for the podcast season, but for the 7 or so months ahead of Election Day 2024. So Rebecca, it's great to have you on the show.
Alan, it is so great to be here. I haven't had the chance to be on yet, but I have been listening to all of these podcasts and have really enjoyed them and your expertise. So thanks for sharing all of this with the church.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to have your expertise here too. It's, I talk doing a lot of church relations pieces, folks around the church tend to know my name, which is nice, but I really am representing the awesome work of my colleagues in this office and the rest of the DFMS staff. So it's great to be able to do that through this podcast.
And as you know, I love any chance that I can get to speak about our office and the incredible work that we're doing and to talk about public policy and why it matters, and this year why this election in particular is so significant, and the opportunities folks can have to bring something positive to this year.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So let's jump right into it then with a few questions. For starters, for several election cycles now, we have framed our election engagement under the Vote Faithfully tagline. So I'm wondering if you could speak a bit about what this tagline means and what it represents.
Thanks for that question. So I actually had to try to remember where that came from, and you then reminded me that Vote Faithfully was an ecumenical effort that started several years ago, and we've really just kept it up and really like that title and way of thinking about how we can vote. And I think it's such a great expression because it really puts faith at the center, not just of voting, but it puts faith at the center of our lives, which is where we're striving for it to be, right? In all aspects of our lives, we want to be considering our faith at the center. And I think that what this does is make sure that we're not putting it to the side when we enter the political realm, but realizing it's connected and that our vote will have an impact on our neighbor and can be one way to demonstrate love for our neighbor, and can be one way for us to really consider our values and how we live into them. Because as we know, the world's a complex place and it's not always clear. So I've loved that you really through your leadership have kept that up and shared resources and encouraged people to have that framing, to have that way of thinking about how they can vote, and then more generally how people can be engaged in our civic life together.
Yeah.
We have this privilege of living in a democratic republic, right? Of living in a democracy where our voices are heard. So we have a chance to weigh in. And as you always say, that means we can do so at the national level, but it also means that in our local elections, whether it's school boards or, county officials, we also have a chance to have a say.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a tagline I've enjoyed promoting and using, because I think it can it lays groundwork for what healthy, faith-informed civic engagement can be. There is a way to do that in a way that's positive and constructive and draws from the communities that we're a part of, including our faith community. So kind of, taking that framing and turning a bit more secular, I suppose. Could you speak a bit about this election year coming up and some of the work that we've been doing as an office to prepare for it?
Yes, I'm happy to. And just again, I should really make clear that for all of our listeners, Alan is really leading our election engagement work and has for some years in his role as church relations officer. So my colleagues and I support him in that. And I'm happy to speak about some of the big picture stuff. But again, really want to acknowledge your leadership in this area. So we actually are doing some kind of election engagement kind of all the time. The midterm elections we're quite interested in, even so-called off election years. There's often still state,
Yep.
different governorship elections, local elections. So we are wanting to make sure that at any point we have resources. There's primaries, of course, year-round, special elections. So for us, there's not just one election season, but of course we acknowledge that a presidential election year is different, and this year's election is certainly a big one. And so we are very focused. And one of the things that we have wanted to do at this point is to make sure people are thinking ahead. Of course, there's the political coverage that is more on sort of what are the polls saying and how are the primaries going. But we also recognize that this all takes planning, the election, and that the more people are able to be thinking through what they can do now, the more they'll be able to have an impact as the election gets closer and on election day. We know, of course, that with early voting and mail-in voting, it's not necessarily that there's only one election day where everything happens, but the planning as we approach November needs to happen now. So that's something I think we're working hard on doing as we look ahead to this election year, just really letting people know that now's a good time if you want to volunteer to be a poll worker. Now's a good time. If you want your house of worship to be a polling station, now's a good time to get that set. It's the times when we don't hear about the election work when really there's so much happening. So I guess I would just, start with that we've been since at least January. We've been planning to start our public engagement in January, but even before that, you and I were having discussions for many months.
We were talking about the 2024 election before the 2023 election
Yep.
day.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's something. And again, we know that the political race is out there, but there's a lot of other positive ways to be engaged as we look ahead. But then I also think it's worth noting that this year, as in the several past years, there's some concerning aspects as well. We're seeing really concerning rhetoric that's dehumanizing of certain people and concerning. We're having political candidates speak approvingly about election violence, and that's something I want to touch on a little bit more,
Sure.
what that looks like. But this is a very polarizing and polarized time, and this is a big election year, and there's a lot at stake. Again, in terms of even people of different political persuasions really feel that way and have in some sense, I think, put their identity, their political identity first, right? Over their identity as a person of faith, perhaps, as a person in their community, as a family member. And I think that can be dangerous when these sort of partisan divides become magnified beyond the policy questions that presumably we are voting on.
Sure, absolutely. Well, and I think that, just speaking personally, and I hear it in other spaces too, but I think that it raises the importance of embodying healthy civic engagement, whether it's faith-informed or not, leading as with an example that if you are a voter, if you are engaged in the public square, there's a way to do this in a constructive way, in a compassionate way. That really, I think, hopefully most people can feel motivated, by and feel called to, when it's not just the sort of more extreme, but very concerning, examples that we often see in the media. So, that to me is part of our underlying goal here, or mine in this work, is to say, how do we be a positive participant in our communities?
Absolutely. And your work on the civil discourse curriculum and offering those resources for how to disagree in a way that enhances understanding. We've done a lot of work on that together as well. And I just think it's such an important resource, and one you've consistently lifted up as being essential, knowing that there are political differences and we still need to live together alongside one another.
Yeah, yeah. Anything else you want to speak to in regards to sort of the election violence concerns, dynamics with that are contributing to it?
Yeah, I think that the new aspect, just let me back up for a minute. We've seen election violence in our history. Certainly looking back over the decades and centuries, but I think even more recently, there was January 6th in 2021, but there have been other acts of targeted violence against federal officials, against political candidates. In 2022, we saw a legitimate assassination attempt on the Speaker of the House when Nancy Pelosi, who was Speaker at that time, her home was entered and her husband was attacked. So, we have seen already some really concerning attempts to attack federal buildings this year. So I think that the escalating political rhetoric is concerning. The actual violence that we've seen is concerning. But something that I think is new and unique to this year and is really different, not just an outgrowth of what we've seen for the past several years, is the artificial intelligence piece. So the AI aspect, which can really shift and undermine how people are consuming information. You and I have worked together alongside our colleagues in OGR on misinformation for a number of years, talking about how critical it is that people are aware of the information that they're sharing, of the information that they're spreading, of the information that they're believing, and highlighting for our network that misinformation and disinformation are significant. That is now even more challenging as we look at what are called deep fakes and AI, where there can be voices of famous political figures that sounds like they're saying something that they've never said, videos, digitally edited and AI-based, whether it's ads or social media content or, news sites that are entirely AI generated. I just think that's incredibly concerning. And the concern is not just that people will believe fake information, but that people will think that, well, nothing is really credible anymore. And then this loss of faith in our systems, which actually have a lot of integrity and checks and balances built into them, that's quite concerning. So I don't think any of us know what it will look like. We've already had a few prominent examples of AI being used in the New Hampshire primary. There was a robocall that went out that had Joe Biden's voice, but it was not President Biden saying, save your vote for November, don't vote in this election. And it was fake. But listening, one wouldn't have known that it was fake. So, we are working to highlight that dimension of this election, and then hope to be able to, with coalition partners, push for there to be some integrity from social media companies, from political campaigns, and a commitment to not use AI in these ways that can really undermine the faith in our system.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's, just a couple of things to note, having gone through a few, of our programs we've done on this topic and the misinformation resource overall, being subject to misinformation or having to buy into it, it's not limited to a political party. So thanks, so much for that framing and a reminder of sort of history, but new dynamics that are happening. And so I think a lot of this is happening and active beyond our church walls. So I want to kind of pivot a little bit in my next question and ask you to speak a bit more about how churches can serve their broader communities. It's not just about getting our parishioners to vote, but it's about looking at our churches, and we're meant to serve our communities in a number of ways. What might that look like with election engagement?
I think that's such an important piece of how individuals and church communities can think about this, which is to look around their own communities and say, what are the needs? And have that be a way of considering how we all prepare for this election that's coming up in November. So I think first is to think through what the needs in your own community are. Maybe you're in a rural area where the polling stations are far apart and need to coordinate rides for people to vote. Maybe there's a need for childcare for people who need to vote after school hours, or who don't have childcare, or don't want to bring their children with them if there's very long lines. I think that there's ways to do outreach and voter education Depending on the state, there's different rules about registration or same-day registration, early registration, again, mail-in voting or early voting. So just helping that information get out there. It's not something we can do for all the states and territories in the US, but there are many great organizations that have state-based resources. And I would just say that helping to share those so people know the registration deadline, they know when and how they can vote, they know the rules in each state. So I think sharing information is such a great one. Again, we haven't emphasized this, you and I know it so well, but churches need to be nonpartisan. All of our work in this is profoundly nonpartisan. We are just trying to help encourage civic engagement so people are aware and informed and engaged. And then we urge people to vote their conscience, recognizing, again, people have different views on a whole range of issues and prioritize things differently. So nonpartisan engagement from churches is absolutely possible. It can be hosting a town hall for candidates, again, with candidates from different parties, so it's not some kind of campaign event, but is really an educational opportunity. So there's lots that can be done. We have some resources on our website that we can speak more about that offer some of those and have more tips for how to go about getting started in some of that work.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the third-party resources. I mean, there are some great nonpartisan organizations out there that have this state-level lens, state-level expertise. And I think another layer to that, there's a lot of concern, understandably, around states that have restricted voting rights. And I think the election season, often voting rights comes up, but it's not always the best moment to impact the laws that are at play. But it is the season when the public is having to navigate those changes. But I want to leave a reminder that it's not just in states where voting rights have been restricted. The majority actually of election legislation passed recently has expanded voting rights. Those still represent changes to the process. They're still changes to the system, and so churches can help, can and need to be helping publicize what those differences are. And how people may be able to vote in a way they weren't able to in the past, or the process might be a little bit different than it was in the past. And so, yeah, we have you mentioned resources on our website. We have our Vote Faithfully resource in English and Spanish. I don't know if you want to speak to that resource in particular and how individuals might use it.
Yeah, that's a great resource that, again, you have expanded over the years, providing even more resources. But the Vote Faithfully toolkit, as you said, is in English and in Spanish, and offers ways for both parishes and individuals to be involved. And so speaks about ways that elections are run and the volunteers that are needed. Sometimes they're paid as poll workers. Again, ways that registering voters can work, mobilizing communities to vote, communicating and helping everyone to be aware of the process, but also sharing information about candidates, again, in a nonpartisan way, but so that people are more aware of some of the races that don't get as much coverage that can be really significant, giving people information like through town halls or other means to just learn more. So you may want to speak some more about some of it, Vote Faithfully Sunday, maybe something that could be of interest.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do, there are a number of worship resources as well in the Vote Faithfully toolkit, including a Prayers of the People, which we're encouraging churches to use the Sunday before Election Day as sort of a Vote Faithfully Sunday, encouraging that to be a more prayerful moment. By that point, just a couple of days before Election Day, many people will have already cast their vote. A lot of the election processes, will have been complete, although obviously people will be voting through Election Day, and then votes may have to be counted, and it may take a while in some places to know the results. That's a natural part of the election process and the counting process. But by Vote Faithfully Sunday, we want to make sure we're in a prayerful space, that we take time to pause on the significance of what it means to participate, what it means to vote faithfully, tying back to that tagline. And maybe another remark about the toolkit, it has a lot of content in it. It's not very long, but there's a lot there. And I want to ask or talk about one more resource in a moment. But this is something that I share with our group of volunteers. To do election engagement well, to me, doesn't mean doing everything that's in that toolkit. It means finding what is most needed, as you said earlier, Rebecca, it's finding what's most needed in your community and looking at where your skills are. What assets does your church have? Is there a physical space? Do you have volunteers? Do you have a connection to a retirement community? Whatever those kind of particularities might be, lean into that and find, how can you facilitate election engagement through using those interests, those skills, those resources. Made a reference to our group of volunteers. I'm wondering if you want to speak to election activators, and then we'll go ahead and close.
Episcopal election activators. So we wanted to find ways for Episcopalians who were involved but really wanted to do more, to be more connected to our office and to be more connected with each other. So we started a program, Episcopal Election Activators, where a group of, again, nonpartisan, everyone who joins signs a nonpartisan pledge, come together regularly and share information and resources about what they're doing. We find that there's so much wisdom and expertise and experience in our network. We're often transmitting information, sharing our action alerts, hosting webinars, sharing resources. But when we're able to bring our network together, we find just incredible synergy across the Episcopalians and dioceses all around the country and beyond. And so that cohort is really engaged, again, under your leadership and with each other in thinking through ways that they can support this election. And so that's been, I think, just a really positive way for people who want to go up to the next level and have a support network and have some resources and have regular check-ins and brainstorming time for them to be able to do that.
Yeah. No, it's been really fun to lead that group. It's a good challenge, because there are folks who are experts who've been doing this for years through various outlets, and this is providing them a way to connect that to their Episcopal identity, which is really, really great. So just for listeners, tuning in, the application is still open and will remain open. So if you are interested in joining this work, it's not too late. And it's also it's a good mixture of people. There are folks who are, have been League of Women Voters volunteers or other, volunteered with other organizations, but there are also people who are new, who haven't done this before. And so there's not necessarily a scale that you have to reach. There's not a bar you have to reach. It really is about the commitment. It's about the wanting to participate in this work in some way. And we'll try to help this group with our guidance. We'll try to help coach you in how to do that. So it's really, it's fun.
And just to say, really emphasize that point, it doesn't have to be everything. Just a few interventions, having a note about registration deadline in the Sunday bulletin or a poster up. That helps people remember when the registration deadline is. Things like that can just go a long way.
Yeah.
And can have an impact. So if you feel so called for this to be one way that you engage in our civic life, I would absolutely encourage you to apply and then to take part and join this really incredible cohort.
Great. Well, thank you for that invitation to our listeners, Rebecca, and it was wonderful to spend some time with you talking about election engagement and setting the stage for the month ahead. Is there anything else that you want to share before we wrap up?
Just to say that this year, maybe like all years, but we're not sure what will come. And so it may be that everything goes off smoothly. When we were speaking a few months ago, we were thinking, oh, well, what if there's election violence on Super Tuesday? Or what if, and many of these dates have passed. But I do think that there's some potential volatility. And so I would just encourage everyone to consider, I think religious leaders in particular, having a kind of plan. If there's an interfaith council or a council of churches in your local area, to have that be a topic of conversation, how religious communities can respond. In our conversations that we've had with experts, these are security experts and academics, we've had a number of briefings for various parts of church leadership on this, they've really emphasized the key role that religious leaders can play in stopping an escalation of violence, in helping to encourage peaceful assembly, peaceful protest, and to make sure that there doesn't get to be a really dangerous spiral of violence or just tensions. So there's a really important role, I think, this year in particular. And it may be that we don't need any of those voices, but with your own networks, I think it's worth raising the question of, how would we respond if there was something? We've seen targeted attacks on places of worship. How do we want to respond as Episcopalians if one of our own institutions or another, again, God forbid for all of this, but is targeted? How do we want to make sure that we're ready? So we want to not alarm people that there's something that will happen this year, but just to encourage a thoughtfulness. It's sort of like doing a fire drill. What'll the plan be if something happens that we're not, we want to make sure that we're ready, and that trusted voices are so essential. We're seeing this decline in trust across the board, and especially with the deepfakes and AI that we spoke about earlier, and our political leaders are not trusted, and our institutions, the trust is declining. But religious voices, your voices, again, as lay people, as clergy, bishops, others, they can still, I think, have an impact and be meaningful. So just be aware of that, and we hope that we can be a resource to you if you have particular questions. We're always happy to connect. So I think I don't want to end on a down note like that, but just to say that I think there's a positive role we can play as a church, really, institutionally and individually and in our communities, and be a voice of trusted leadership.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a way. I mean, sure, it's a caution, but it's about being empowered and preparing
Exactly.
for moments that we may not be able to anticipate, but we can at least lay some groundwork, make some preparations for it. So yeah, I appreciate that reminder and the ways that different parts of the church, different leaders, different individuals can use their voices, use their platforms in helpful ways. So again, Rebecca, thank you. Look forward to the rest of this podcast season. We have some really cool guests planned, including hopefully some election activators, so folks can hear from them directly and maybe be encouraged to sign up. So with that, we'll sign off.
Thank you so much, Alan. Thanks to all our listeners.
The Office of Government Relations aims to represent the policy priorities of the Episcopal Church to the U.S. government in Washington, D.C., and to influence policy and legislation on critical issues, highlighting the voices and experiences of Episcopalians and Anglicans globally. The office facilitates the Episcopal Public Policy Network, a grassroots network of Episcopalians engaged in the ministry of public policy advocacy. Take action and learn more by following the links in the description. The Episco-pols podcast is produced by the staff of the Office of Government Relations, with support from our amazing podcast engineer, Mike Collins, and superb project manager, Chris Sikkema. Thanks for listening, and join us next time on Episco-pols.